Welcome to Toxan Memoria's lore presentation. The first era is the creation story, or the Null era, which is mostly used for world building and things like that. There's usually not a lot that is described as happening, really, in the Null era, hence the name. I provided two different entries from legends or myths that would be found as describing this time, but it's still up to debate if these things actually happened in this exact way. First one is, in the beginning, there were two beings, Akran and Nazared. The two beings were brothers, both with limitless power of creation and destruction. Akran created humans, elves, dwarves, and dragons, creatures of logic and order. Nazared created magic, goblins, ogres, orcs, and other monsters. Creatures meant to create chaos and spark change. Akran created the land on which these creatures would live, and Nazared created the clouds, thunder, rain, and snow. The two brothers created wildlife, which would provide for the new denizens who would populate their world, which would be called Oxared. It created the stars, the sun, and the moon. Finally, it created two great dragons which would watch over the world, Runelith, Archaelith. Satisfied with their work, Akran and Nazared disappeared into the heart of the world, never to return. The creation, unknown author. Then second, the dragons took to the mountains closest to the guardians. The elven people took to the forests rich in magic and shelter. The dwarves took to the plains and caves below, filled with treasures and valuable ore. The humans, with nowhere to call home, took to the sea. This was the origin of the kingdoms, also unknown author. And into the next era. After the creation of the world, two beings appeared called the Gifted. There's no record of where they came from, but they brought books that would shape the fates of the eras to come, 26 in number. Nobody knows the true contents of these books, but they disappeared along with their owners. Some say the pages of these books make up the paper castle, which appears at the end of each era, almost like a herald. With the disappearance of the Gifted, time began to flow, and the Alpha era began. Now for the Alpha era, the Age of Myths. On the planet Oxred sat a continent named Chanizar. The first era of adventure, Alpha introduced new gods, and those brought new conflict. Conflict brought heroes who changed the very fate of every era after. Callahan, born from an egg atop Mount Wultai, unified the peoples of Chanizar to prepare for the threats that would come. Callahan was accompanied by his friend and protector, Saberam, a dragonfolk, who stayed by his side through the whole ordeal. The Celiar Ironjaw Gawain led a rebellion against his uncle, king of the human seafaring kingdom, and founded the port city of Luxopolis, the first human city. Toxan was the first sage, an individual chosen by unknown gods to fulfill a specific purpose. Toxan was tasked with recording the names and events of everything in this era, proclaimed the chronicler. Finally, Zelef led an expedition into the depths under Ultai and found the Cave of Origin, which housed the One Mask. The mask allowed mortals to speak with the gods. The gods gave guidance on building new kingdoms, but this also brought about an eventual end of an era. With the new era, the mortals learned of new gods that oversaw the forces of nature and fate itself. First, there was Order, represented by a moth. Order protected those who sought justice and became the patron deity of royalty and adventurers. The second was Chaos, represented by a wasp. Chaos did not speak to the kingdoms that used the mask, and instead acted through mayhem by way of tragedy, mischief, and eventually attempted deicide. There was a third god, represented by a butterfly, but nothing was known of this god. They were simply known as an observer who does not intervene. In addition to these three higher gods, there were 6 elemental protectors, one for each alchemical element in Chanizarian alchemy: fire, forest, sky, ice, water, and darkness. They resided in a separate plane, each in their own domain. At the end of the Alpha era, Chaos used armies of monsters to attack each of the kingdoms aligned with order. Much was lost. Zelith was forgotten by history, even leaving the chronicler's records after making a deal with death. The new god was created, named X. X alone was capable of felling chaos and bringing peace to Chananzar, but this disturbed a delicate balance and led to a terrible cataclysm unrecorded in any surviving historical records. All life was extinguished. X returned, wearing the one mask, and began a new era called Beta. Also included a map of Chananzar. So to the north was Mount Ultai, and just south of that is Chananzar Plains. This area will remain mostly unchanged through each of the eras. There's also the beginnings of a few other areas that will come back later. Now for the Beta era, or the Age of Legends. X, in possession of the One Mask, began the new era just before Chaos was destroyed. Life continued in this revived Oxred, with some minor changes. Zarheim, capital city of the humans, stood proudly in the central region of Chananzar. The ever-expanding human empire extended all the way south to Luxopolis, which had become a bustling city of trade, and began to encroach on the Elven territory in the east. The elves split into two groups. High elves lived in the northern portion among mountains and pine trees, creating the schools of magic that would be used throughout the rest of the continent. Low elves lived in the southern portion of the swamp, mastering the art of music and guarding the world tree. The roost rose above the red sands to the northeast, housing the ancient dragons, the only beings who knew what had transpired between Alpha and Beta. In the Western Plains, Callahan's legacy was founded, dedicated to being a unified safe city for any people of any background. Ordal, founded by enterprising merchants tired of pirate raids in Luxopolis, stood on the isthmus between southwestern Chananzar and the uninhabited land to the south. Ordal became a center of technology and exploration, eventually building a fleet of impressive airships. The paper castle floated to the east of Zarheim above a lake, held in place by gigantic chains. The armor of X rested here, waiting. The sage of this era was Todrin, a great wizard who held a book capable of creating brand new spells even beyond the capabilities of the High Elves. Her book disappeared after the era, but not the powerful spells which are used even in Delta. The era began peacefully, but the humans of Zarheim began to grow restless, bringing about a war of conquest. This was no doubt due to the influence of chaos. This war eventually brought a violent end to the era, at which point X once again returned to herald the next beginning. With Beta, more gods came about. Chaos had 3 sons, Mischief, Mayhem, and Malevolence. Order had 3 daughters, Justice, Jubilation, and Jury. Once again, the butterfly god observed, but gave no name or objective. Below this trinity was another. The Phoenix commanded the elements of fire and forest, granted boons to those who showed great courage. The Kraken oversaw the elements of water and darkness, and favored those who showed great wisdom or wit. Vladnik was a fierce god who commanded great loyalty from his followers. He guarded the elements of ice and sky. Finally, a great cacophony of voices made itself known. 26 voices who chose sages for each era. Their goal or purpose was unclear, but they had great power over reality. And then an updated map for Beta. Next is the Gamma era, or the Heroic Chronicles. The world has been split into a multitude of planes, connected by a network of interdimensional tunnels. In the center is Oxred, home of 2 factions, the Alliance and the Order. 3 other major planes surrounded Oxred, namely Mistar, Embron, and Drak. Each of these planes had their own histories, heroes, and villains. When the heroes of these planes conquered their villains, a path opened between the plane and Oxered. Thus began the Heroic Chronicles. The Heroic Chronicles was a period of war between the Alliance and the Order, headed by Gawain Hofton and Grockweiser Blackheart, respectively. Both sides of the war had a veritable army of important individuals, one of which was Lucas Cocknor. I have a map here, but it's a little bit different. This is how the planes were arranged in the Gamma era, with Imbron, Drak, and Mishtar surrounding Chanazar, and then there's the Dream, the Elemental Realm, and a Negative Realm connecting each of them. Here's a little bit more about Lucas Cocknor. As a baby, Lucas Cocknor was granted great knowledge by an artifact known as the Halo. How this child ended up with this powerful artifact is a mystery, although some theorize it was a thwarted plot of the Order. The Halo granted Lucas a spectacular ability to learn, study, and invent, but denied him any sort of people skills until he was a teenager. As a young adult, Lucas was scouted by the Alliance after a personal visit from Gawain Halfdan, who promised him a position in the organization that would allow him to develop technology beyond imagination. Lucas took this opportunity to create a cure for all diseases, a man-made gateway between realms, and advanced Oxered's technology by a seemingly impossible degree. During his position at the Alliance, Lucas also studied the Dream, urged by Gawain to find a way to prevent the end of the Gamma era. During these studies, Lucas and Gawain created the Butterfly Core, a powerful and impossible artifact powered by a Philosopher's Stone. The Butterfly Core's task was to run simulations of Gamma and the other eras to see if a possible reality exists in which an era would not end. Lucas was later ousted from the Alliance, but nobody can quite say what happened to cause this. The Heroic Chronicles came to a head as the sage of the era, Drake, sought to destroy the Silent God. The Silent God was a mysterious being that appeared shortly after the creation of the Butterfly Core. Many thought the two were connected, but nothing could quite support this theory. After Drake attempted to destroy the Silent God, he disappeared without a trace, and the tunnels connecting to the other planes vanished. Anybody in these other planes were now stranded with no way to return to their homes. One such person was Lucas, unable to see if the Butterfly Core's task was ever completed. Butterfly Core disappeared during the confusion, and Gawain was killed by Blackheart. In this moment, reality itself burned to ash, and the Gamma era came to an end. Butterfly Core vanished at the end of Gamma, seemingly by its own volition. Suddenly, the core appeared in the Dream, while being held by a core communication device that Lucas had created named Byte. Byte and the core drifted down into the abyss of the Dream, eventually finding themselves in Tartarus. When Byte was finally powered on, the Butterfly Core was gone, and a huge city stood where there was once an empty void. The Delta era had begun. During the Gamma era, one of the many planes that appeared was the Dream, a realm of the unknown and impossible to travel to intentionally. The Dream exists between time and space, and plays a very important role in keeping the fabric of reality intact. Any who dream, have visions, or receive premonitions all send some small part of themselves to the Dream. The Dream also houses the souls of the departed. Generally, the souls travel to Tartarus, where they rest until the next era begins, at which point they are reincarnated. However, for unknown reasons, several souls have been abandoned in Tartarus, between Gamma and Delta. The people whose souls are trapped are forgotten by history. Recently, Tartarus has also become a home to Watchers, servants of the original Lord of Chaos. With no master, they wander the realm of the dead and desecrate their helpless memories. Tartarus was just a concept until the Butterfly Core drifted down to the bottom of the Dream. The core influenced the threads of world magic that made up Tartarus and shaped it into a physical city. The Butterfly Core continued to function, stimulating Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and even Delta. Finding itself with more power than before, the Butterfly Core created a body for itself, wearing the face of Callahan. This life created from nothing, an anomaly, was named Toxan Memoria, guardian of the Forgotten Souls. Much like the first Toxan, this being would be a record keeper of all who reside in Tartarus, and would work to find a way to free the Forgotten Souls, allowing them to be reborn in the new era. Finally, we find ourselves in the Delta era, also called the Infinite Finality. While the butterfly court drifted into the dream, the Delta era began. Once again, there was one world, Oxared. The kingdoms from the Beta era had returned. Most importantly, a series of strange towers had appeared across the continent of Janizar. Some were harmless, while others caused strange or threatening phenomena. In the beginning of the era, a band of adventurers were sent to negotiate peace with the dragonfolk. This bid for peace ended in a disaster, however, as an ancient dragon god was released as a plague across the continent, scorching the plains near Callahan's legacy into a wasteland. Before the adventurers were able to assist with the disaster response, Rockweiser Blackheart arrived with his 3 sons, ushering in an age of chaos. The adventurers went to challenge Lord Blackheart, capturing him in his soul gem, causing his sons to retreat. A century passes. Here's the Delta era map after the 100 centuries. One day, a lone adventurer by the name of Lilac arrives in Chanazar and is sent into the Soul Crystal of Chaos to finish off Lord Blackheart. She finds herself in the Delta Archipelago, a world created entirely by the wild magics of chaos. While there, she encounters the souls of other adventurers who try to do the same as her during the centuries since Lord Blackheart's capture. Eventually, she finds Lord Blackheart weakened by his solitude. Lord Blackheart fades away without a fight, and the crystal shatters, releasing Lilac and the souls of the lost adventurers. The Sons of Chaos sense his defeat and begin to fight for the empty throne. Meanwhile, Ripley Wormtongue appears in Luxopolis, claiming to be the reincarnation of Chaos. Rather than seeking to disrupt the order of the world, however, Ripley joins Lilac on her journey, investigating the strange towers and their creators, the Scholars. The Delta era is the final era of the Alpha continuity. The fates of Lilac and Ripley, the motives of the Scholars, and even the existence of reality itself are all intertwined in a great question posed by the Silent God.